Thank you for joining us today in another Red and the Black webinar series. And today we're very lucky to have the ATO join us to talk about debt collection activity. So we've got Bronwyn Dumont, and she's a director at the ATO. Bronwyn works in the ATO Service Delivery Group, where she's responsible for stronger action and insolvency within debt and lodgement management. Debt and lodgement management has primary responsibility for the collection of debts from clients who are unwilling to engage with the ATO and those who exhibit egregious and non-compliant behaviour. So welcome, Bronwyn, to the session today, and thank you very much for joining us. And we've also got Gary Busby, who's a Senior Insolvency Advisor at the ATO. He's a Senior Insolvency Advisor in the Debt and Lodgement Management branch of the Service Delivery Group. Gary joined the ATO during 2017 after holding senior executive positions in the insolvency industry in Australia and the UK. Gary leads the complex insolvency team, which includes dealing with arrangements under the Corporations Act or the Bankruptcy Act that provide alternatives to bankruptcy or liquidation, indemnity funding and industry engagement. Gary is also a member of ARETA as well. So welcome as well, Gary, to today, and thank you again for agreeing to join us. Just a bit of housekeeping. There's a Q&A button and a chat button at the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to ask questions as we go through. The questions will come to at the end of the session. So we've got a number of topics that we're going to cover today in this fairly short session, but we will get to question time right at the end. So without further ado, we'll get started into it. So firstly, I'll ask you the first question, Bronwyn. What sort of debt collection activity can we expect to see in the future from the ATO as we're starting to exit lockdowns? And coming from Melbourne, we're very happy about exiting at least part of that lockdown tonight at 11:59. So what can we see over the next period of time?
Well, congratulations firstly to Melbourne. 1 minute past midnight. I hope you're all, out and about and having a good time. So through COVID and, from about March 2020, the ATO has applied a tailored or enhanced engagement approach, basically. So that approach really involves phone contact with taxpayers by senior and experienced ATO officers to gain a deeper understanding of the taxpayer's circumstances and work through the options for the taxpayer, including what we can do to assist. So from April 2021, and where appropriate, we have started to take firmer and stronger action, including legal action. So we provide, in the first instance, always provide help and assistance for those who need it and who are willing to engage with us. However, our interactions with taxpayers do include providing formal warnings of intended stronger and firmer actions and where it's appropriate to do so. So it's important to note, though, that penalties and stronger actions are only applied after we have sufficiently attempted contact and engaged with the client to resolve, via help and assistance. There would always need to be a reasonable time that has passed to allow the taxpayer to reach out for support if they need it, either with us or through their tax professional. So we would only apply them after we have provided the taxpayer advanced warning, the aim being to encourage the taxpayer to engage with us first, which is our preferred alternative as opposed to pursuing other actions. So we won't make broad assumptions or treatment approaches, but rather engage with each taxpayer to understand this. So we're not, taking any action without really doing our best to engage and understand what is the best approach.
Okay, well, thanks, Bronwyn. I'll ask the next question to you, Gary. What do you think, if you've got an accountant's got a problem with the client's got tax debt that's actually sitting there, what is the best way of approaching the tax office in terms of dealing with that sort of problem?
Okay, well, thanks, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me to attend this forum. It's always a great opportunity for us to engage with taxpayers or their representatives, so very, very happy to be here. So in terms of best way to interact with the ATO is, well, to start off with, we do require payment in full. But if the client is unable to pay right away, then they need to consider an online payment plan, or ask their advisor to get in touch with us now. We are making it easier for taxpayers to pay their tax on time and avoid debt by improving access to our online services. And all clients and their authorised representatives now have access to online services for business, which became available on the 20th of January this year. Now, these online services provide visibility of upcoming lodgement and payment due dates, payment channel options, including payment reference numbers, and provide direct access to make a bank or credit card payment. Also, all clients and their authorised representatives can also manage the payment plans online. And if they anticipate having difficulty meeting an upcoming instalment, then they're able to modify the date and or the amount of the instalment, or in fact cancel the payment plan and input a new one if they're still eligible to do that. They can also view the payment plan to see what instalments are coming up. Now, the payment plan is available on online services through our website. And if they need a more tailored approach, then the client can contact their registered tax practitioner or call us on 13 11 42 during operating hours.
Yep, thanks, Gary. Bronwyn, one of the things that's happened during the last 12 months is that various states have gone through different levels of lockdowns and pandemic type responses. Victoria and New South Wales obviously have been through extended lockdown periods. WA, Queensland, really other states haven't necessarily done that. Is the tax office taking a view of treating different states differently depending on what the responses are to the pandemic?
Yeah, so look, I mean, we do recognise that the lockdown impacts, they're not evenly spread across industries, geographies, or even points in time. So both the state and federal governments have given commitments to moving away from blanket approaches. And similarly, the ATO, we're not applying blanket treatments or assumptions across the population, but we will look at the specific circumstances of taxpayers in each geographic area and provide a tailored response based on that. So, I don't know that we necessarily have a articulated state response, but we're definitely reacting to what's happening across the geographies. There is a key reason, this is another key reason it's really important for taxpayers to maintain contact with us, because, geographies are not necessarily always visible. Potentially someone may be, have a business postcode that's quite separate to where their business operates, those sorts of things. And if we don't sort of really understand that there is some, it's not as, well, I guess we don't know what we don't know. And if we don't know that someone's running a business that is severely impacted, it's really important that they tell us. So over the past 18 months, we've really pivoted away from stronger and firmer action in areas affected by lockdowns. So we have deliberately done that and turned our focus in those areas to providing help and assistance. And as our economy moves towards recovery and regions really fully reopen, we'll then reassess client circumstances and recommence that enhanced engagement with them. So, I think the answer is yes. We have a really nuanced approach, but it's not necessarily as black and white as you would assume.
Yeah, thank you. That certainly makes sense. Gary, we were talking before about the best way of actually dealing with the ATO in relation to outstanding debt. But where you might have, say, a taxpayer that, say, doesn't want to engage or doesn't engage in a way that enables the issues to be resolved. What sort of tools are actually at your disposal for recovery of those debts?
Well, there's a number of things that will happen in those circumstances, Stephen. So if a debt is not paid on time, we will charge interest on the unpaid amount. We will contact the taxpayer via SMS, MyGov, or letters or phone calls. And any ATO refunds or credits will be applied to that debt. Now, for cases that are referred for stronger action, when clients avoid engaging with us or repeatedly default on payment plans or just don't have the capacity to pay or take steps to resolve their situation. We currently don't refer debts to external collection agencies for collection on our behalf, but this is something we might do so in the future. The cycle of potential stronger action we may take includes garnishee, director penalty notices, claim or summons, bankruptcy notice, creditor's petition, statutory demand, and wind-up action. Now, on the administrative level, garnishee notices can be issued to both companies and individuals, and director penalty notices can be issued either before or after a garnishee notice has been issued. One's not dependent on the other. On the individual level, for claims, summonses, bankruptcy notice, or creditors' petitions, a claim must be issued prior to judgment being obtained. But once judgment has been obtained, we may issue a bankruptcy notice. Once a bankruptcy notice has been served and not complied with, we can then progress to a creditor's petition stage. With respect to those actions at a corporate level, they include statutory demand and wind-up action. Now, usually once the ATO has made several attempts to contact the company, we also may issue a garnishee notice and a director penalty notice, we can then elect to issue a statutory demand. Now, if that statutory demand is not complied with, then the ATO may elect to wind up the company.
Thank you, Gary. So that raises a couple of points, and some of these aren't really well understood, I think, within the accounting profession, and that is director penalty notices. So, you've got a number of different, they're not as simple as they used to be. You've got lockdown, non-lockdown type penalty notices these days. Bronwyn, can you maybe just take us through how these penalty notices actually work? And I noted that Gary had said that they can be issued either before a company is wound up and even after a company has gone into liquidation. So, you able to comment about DPNs?
Sure. Company directors, they are responsible for making sure the company meets its PAYG, GST and superannuation guarantee obligations. I think probably worth saying up front, these are all obligations where they're remitting on behalf of. So, their employees withholding, superannuation, GST. So if a company fails to meet those obligations in full by the due date, they basically become personally liable for a director penalty equal to the unpaid amount. However, before we can recover that, we do need to first give them notice, and that is what we call a director penalty notice. So, and that will outline the amounts, unpaid amounts and remission options available. So, basically payment will remove the director penalty, placing the company into an insolvency administration. And there's something else it'll come back to me as I'm talking, so I'll just keep going. And we can then, after the, basically the compliance period for that notice has expired, which is 21 days, we could then issue a garnishee, offset any tax credits, or initiate legal action against the directors of those companies. So we can also issue a director penalty when a company is in insolvency, basically. So, and there's a couple of instances. So where superannuation guarantee, where the statements are not lodged, we can automatically lock that down into the future. And for pay as you go, it's a little bit complicated, but I think it's 3 months. If it's not reported within 3 months of the liability or the lodgement due date, it also becomes lockdownable when the company is insolvent. So just some basic information there. We could talk a really long time, but I'm sure we don't want to take up the whole hour, right, on director penalties. But happy to take some questions if there's any.
So it'd be fair to say then that it's the lodgement that is actually important at the end of the day. I mean, you may find that the payment doesn't necessarily be made, but say with the superannuation, for example, that lodgement that needs to be made on that form with the ATO, that would be an important component.
Absolutely. Really important to lodge the superannuation statements, to lodge your BAS, even if you can't pay it. Lodge it, contact us and talk about payment. But, directors need to understand that they are actually personally liable if they're not lodging and reporting those amounts.
Yeah, no, thank you. Gary, I might talk a little bit to you about garnishees and what can be garnished, what they actually mean, how they're actually used. Can you comment about those?
Yeah, of course. Look, where a taxpayer refuses to engage with us to pay what they owe, a garnishee notice can be issued to a bank or other entity who holds money for them, requiring them to pay us directly to reduce the tax debt. Except in very rare circumstances where there's a high risk of evasion action by the taxpayer, firmer actions such as garnishee notices are only considered where multiple attempts to engage with them have been made. So we use several channels for engagement, starting with initial reminder messages and texts, through to phone calls and letters to advise of potential consequences. Before taking action, we look for evidence that the client is fully aware of their overdue obligations and potential consequences. And garnishees without notice are very rare and only applied where, for example, we have significant concerns that assets may be dissipated to evade payment of tax or super obligations. These are all carefully considered by a panel of senior ATO staff before that action is taken. And for those not aware, there is quite a lot of information on our website that covers off on garnishee notices.
Thank you. I might just ask Bron, I'll ask you this question. And it's to do with one of the other things that's been in the media probably lately is the reporting to credit reporting agencies. You able to comment at all about that?
Yes. So the ATO can now report small business liabilities over $100,000 to credit reporting agencies. But there are some conditions that the ATO must, or I shouldn't say conditions, there's a range of steps that we need to go through, and that includes the debt must be more than 10 weeks old. We must notify the taxpayer or the small business that we intend to list that debt, to give them the opportunity to make an arrangement or pay it before we actually go ahead with that listing. I think that's all of the conditions. There is a lot of information on the ATO website on ato.gov.au, But, I think importantly around disclosure of business tax debts is that the ATO, will only look at those sorts of options where taxpayers do not engage with us. Clearly, if the debt's got to be more than 10 weeks old and, there's no arrangement or there's no contact with the taxpayer letting us know their circumstances, that's the only time we will list. So really important that, small business and taxpayers generally are letting us know what's going on.
Yeah. So
because we're very nice, really.
So like so many things in when it comes to outstanding debts, early communication is always the key, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so it brings us to the question that a lot of people in the insolvency profession really want to know the answer to, and that is in relation to when we're going to see more activity in the bankruptcy and the liquidation space happening. Gary, I might ask you that question.
Sure. Okay. Look, it's likely that we will take firmer action in the second half of this year, but again, it'll be in a measured and appropriate way. The ATO is not a significant contributor to total numbers of bankruptcies and windings up, and generally only takes these actions to protect the broader business community and the integrity of the taxation and the super system. As a consequence of our re-engaging with taxpayers, we do expect that ATO-initiated insolvencies will start to increase. But just to give a bit of context, so from the period from July 2020 to 30th of June 2021, the ATO initiated 6 bankruptcies and 3 wind-ups. So not a lot of activity in the past. As I say, we do expect it to pick up the second half of this financial year, but that's subject to the changing environment that we live in.
And we live in an environment that changes very quickly, absolutely, as those in Sydney and Melbourne will appreciate. Yeah, thank you for that comment. Look, I'll open it up to questions now. So there's a chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please, by all means, use that, and we'll ask questions. So I do have first question from Michael is, how does the ATO decide if and when to take action on a lockdown DPN? I have seen cases of companies being in liquidation for some time, but the ATO not taking DPN action. So I might give that one to you, Bronwyn, if that's okay, given you answered the DPN question.
Sure. So look, there's a range of factors that we would consider. How much is the debt? Can we actually issue a lockdown DPN? Was the statement lodged on time? Is there actually the availability to issue a lockdown? How much is the debt? Over what period was it incurred? Have we spoken to the directors of the company? A range of things. And I think the other thing, that we probably need to consider if we're seeing where the ATO hasn't looked at or hasn't issued a lockdown in particular circumstances is that really over the last 18 months when, we have taken this really, an enhanced engagement approach. So not necessarily sort of followed the usual processes that we would. So I don't think that I can kind of give anything more specific than that, because it really is, tailored to the circumstances of the case. It is even things like, is the superannuation liability, is it mostly the director's superannuation, for instance? So even things like that we would look at, do the directors have assets, etc.
So tailored made to the particular case, and probably maybe on the basis on which the taxpayer may have been dealing with the ATO as well, I suppose.
Absolutely, yes.
Chris, are there any other questions that we've got?
A pre-question from Cam Rivington.
Yep.
Cam, let's go back to that. Basically, I am sorry. In the meantime, there's a question from Ed, actually. So I'll go back to with that question.
I'll do this next question. Historically, the ATO, it's from Bill. Historically, the ATO held the view that taxpayer's circumstances were private and not available to the public. With the introduction of DPNs, which is a very powerful tool to encourage payment of any unpaid tax, why did the ATO now agree to provide this information to credit reporting agencies? I'm happy to either one of you. That one, that's a difficult question, I suspect.
Gary, I'll take one for the team here. So disclosure of business tax debt is only related to small business debt. So it's not individual personal debts. It's purely, as I said, small business debt. So there are some really, like I said, there's a few process steps that we need to go through. And, you know, it's all, those steps are really reliant on taxpayers engaging with us. So, you know, I suppose, you know, that legislation was passed, there was a whole range of, you know, like I said, steps that we had to follow, and we do have to continue to follow to make sure that small business are really on notice that, you know, they need to engage with us about their debt. And if they do, they wouldn't be subject to disclosure of business tax debt. But I think equally, you know, we do need to understand the impact that small business debt can have on other small businesses and the economy and the community generally. So it's a really interesting and really hard question, Bill. But I think, you know, the bottom line is we're not just going to willy-nilly select a group of 100 taxpayers and report them. We're going to look maybe at 100 taxpayers to see if they fit the criteria, and then contact them to let them know that they're actually in scope for their debt to be disclosed to a credit reporting agency. So I think the other thing I would say too is, on the other side of this, many in the community have been calling for the ATO to disclose these debts for a very long time, because they do impact on others. So, you know, people that are extending credit or, you know, terms, basically, you know, they're all impacted where they don't have visibility of the ATO debt. So I think it's, Bill, really hard, really good question, but I think it's a really complex issue as well.
Thanks, Bronwyn. I appreciate that. So I might, given that you took one for the team, Bronwyn, we might ask. Ed asks, in cases where small sole traders continue to trade but never lodge BASs and tax returns, will the ATO take measures that can ABNs? That's a difficult question too, I think.
That's another hard one.
It's a very good question.
Yes.
Yeah, look, it's difficult. You know, we don't know what we don't know. You know, if there's a taxpayer that's not lodging and they are registered for GST, then you know, they would be they would be subject to normal you know, collection processes and reminders and everything else. But look, it's you know, it's possible some people do slip through the system, at least initially. But we do try to capture those and deal with them as we can. Look, a sole trader, of course, is always at that greater risk of personal exposure to debt and ultimately bankruptcy if they don't pay. So, as I say, it's again another one of those complex areas, but it is, you know, it is something that we do consider.
Thanks, Gary. Chris, you have that question?
Yeah, I'll ask Cam's question. Under a particular, what the ATO practice statement, law, administration, etc., shows the ATO can issue garnishee notices on super funds. Does the ATO have any stats on number and value of recoveries made from super funds so far, and value of notices issued but not yet effective? Do you want me to repeat that?
No, it's Bronwyn. So, look, I think we don't report to that level of detail on garnishees. However, what I would say is it wouldn't be common for the ATO to issue a garnishee to a superannuation fund. So sorry, not sort of information that's readily accessible in our data, and we would probably have to, I don't know, turn our minds to how we could even find that within our data.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's a difficult question as well. They're all difficult questions, but the next one's from Kayleen. In many circumstances, it is the ATO debt that drives a business to liquidation, and in many of these cases, if the ATO wiped interest, the taxpayer would be able to repay the debt, but you almost always never consider this nor grant this. In light of the issues with COVID on small business, is the ATO going to start to look at this option? So, either one of you.
Okay, look, I'll take that on initially. Look, there are guidelines around on that deal with remission of GIC, and it is set out in one of the PSLAs. I can't recall off the top of my head which one it is. It'd be one of the 2011 ones. So there are guidelines there, and there is some discretion, depending on if it's just simply GIC on a late payment, and they are considered. I mean, in terms of the tax debt driving to insolvency, well, that's probably not a proposition we would accept anyway, because most of the taxes are their remittances out of payroll or super or GST. So they are a liability that the company incurs. The fact that they may tend to grow is choice of the business owner who they pay. We believe the ATO should be paid regularly as every other creditor is. So if someone comes to us with a request for remission of GIC, we certainly review that on its merits.
Yeah, thanks. And I think your comment's spot on. I mean, like businesses incur debts of various sorts, and tax is just another one of those that is actually incurred. So I concur with that. Ted asked a question, what is the ATO attitude to personal insolvency arrangements? Does the ATO give consideration to these?
It's Bronwyn. I'll take that one, but I do want to just go back and correct something I said earlier. So when I talked about disclosure of business tax debts, I think I said 10 weeks. The debt has to be overdue for more than 90 days. Sorry. So I just want to correct that. So yes, we... in the ATO, we do consider personal insolvency arrangements, and we don't have any concerns. In fact, I think we would, Gary, think it's a good thing that people, our clients, taxpayers, are actually turning their mind to their own solvency and doing something about it.
Thank you. Because there's those, and there's also the small business restructures as well that we'll probably see a lot more of, I suspect, as we come through into next year.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we have the same attitude there. We're not sort of, I think we don't want people to think we're there to punish them. We're absolutely not. We have a job to do. And if we can sort of assist small businesses by, looking at a small business restructure, or an individual by looking at, favourably, or really considering a personal insolvency arrangement, that's what we want to do.
Thank you. That's probably, I don't think there's any other questions. So that's probably a really...
there is a question from Nicholas Semias.
All right.
Can we hear a little more on credit agency reporting? Can we expect to see a lot of this? I think some of this has been answered, but not that question possibly. It seems it would be a service to suppliers who might otherwise unwittingly supply technically insolvent businesses.
Look, I can probably, because I've actually opened up ato.gov.au, and I did put that in the chat box.
Yes,
I can probably just give a little bit more information. I'm not sure that we could predict how many we're likely to actually report to credit bureaus, because there is the criteria that we've got to actually follow to actually, basically list it. So, so the criteria, I'll just go through that again because I didn't tell you all of it, sorry. The small business has to have an ABN and is not an excluded entity, has one or more tax debts of at least $100,000 overdue by more than 90 days and hasn't engaged with us to manage their tax debts, and doesn't have an ongoing complaint about the proposed reporting of the entity's debt information with the Inspector General of Taxation. So excluded entities are deductible gift recipients, complying superannuation funds, registered charities or government entities. We do send an intent to disclose, and basically that allows the taxpayer, puts them on notice and allows them the time to actually come back to us. So I would say, really hard to say, and I would expect that most small businesses that want to continue trading and are viable would probably engage with us at the point that we issue the intent notice, if that helps.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Bill's got a question. What action is the ATO taking to prevent developers avoiding GST on the sale of property by liquidating the company? That's an interesting one.
Okay, well, I'll have a go at that one. Look, I assume, is this a reference to the GST?
Yes.
Well, the loophole certainly on residential properties, I think, has been closed now, where the responsibility on the purchaser to pay to remit that GST. Certainly in the past we have come across that, and it is an area we are aware of. Hence that law reform there. But where it's happened in the past without, before the law changed, it's very hard to recover the tax debt if the company is liquidated, and the directors personally have very limited resources, but certainly there are matters that we do look at, and we do engage with liquidators where we are aware that there has been a deliberate attempt to try and avoid the tax, and we do pursue that where we can.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Chris, we got any other questions?
I think we've covered all of the questions.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. Bronwyn and Gary, look, thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us and explain a little bit more about how the ATO actually works and the debt collection process. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate everyone who's attended and spent the time today. These are short, sharp sessions. So on that basis, I wish you all a good day. For those in Melbourne, make the most of getting out of lockdown tonight. So have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks for
much.
having us.
Yes, thank you.